Sarah Bennett's hands shook as she stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. 30 days. That's all she had left before she and Emma would be out on the street. Mom, what's that paper? Emma's voice cut through the panic rising in Sarah's throat. Nothing, sweetheart. Just junk mail. Sarah crumpled the notice and shoved it into her purse before unlocking their apartment door. The lie tasted bitter, but 8-year-old Emma didn't need to carry that burden. Inside their cramped 2-bedroom apartment, Sarah dropped onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. 3 months behind on rent, despite working double shifts at Mountain View Cafe. David's child support checks had stopped coming 6 months ago when he disappeared to God knows where. Her lawyer said tracking him down would cost more than she'd ever recover. Emma plopped down beside her, curly brown hair bouncing. Mrs. Patterson gave me cookies today. She said you looked tired. Sarah forced a smile. I'm okay, baby. Just had a long day. The mail sat unopened on their coffee table. Bills, mostly. Sarah had stopped opening them weeks ago, knowing she couldn't pay them anyway. But one envelope caught her attention. Thick, cream-colored paper with an embossed return address. Matthews and Associates, attorneys at law, Portland, Oregon. Her heart sank. Another debt collector, probably. Some company David had screwed over that was now coming after her. She almost threw it away unopened, but something made her tear it open instead. The letterhead was elegant, professional. The letter itself was brief. Dear Ms. Bennett, we regret to inform you of the passing of Eleanor Matthews, your great-aunt. According to her last will and testament, you have been named as a beneficiary. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange for the transfer of your inheritance. The bequest amount is $1. Sincerely, Nathan Matthews, ESQ, executor of estate. Sarah read it twice, then burst into laughter. Bitter, hysterical laughter that made Emma look up from her coloring book with concern. $1. Her great-aunt Eleanor, who she barely remembered meeting once as a child, had left her exactly $1. The cosmic joke of it all was too much. Here she was, about to lose everything, and her only family inheritance was enough to buy a candy bar. What's funny, Mom? Life, sweetheart. Life is very, very funny sometimes. Sarah tried to remember Eleanor Matthews, a tall, elegant woman who had visited when Sarah was maybe 7 years old. She'd stayed for dinner, talked to Sarah's parents in hushed tones, and left the next morning. Sarah's mother had called her eccentric, said she lived alone in some big house in the mountains and designed buildings for rich people. That was over 20 years ago. Sarah's parents had died in a car accident when she was in college, and she'd never heard from Eleanor again. Until now, apparently. She looked at the letter again. Matthews and Associates. The lawyer shared Eleanor's last name. Probably a relative handling the estate. Sarah wondered what kind of person bothered to leave someone a single dollar. It felt almost insulting, like Eleanor was making some kind of point from beyond the grave. Emma had moved to the window, watching the neighbor kids play in the courtyard. They lived in a better complex across town now. Their father hadn't abandoned them and maxed out credit cards in their mother's name. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her manager at the cafe. Need you to cover Jenny's shift tomorrow. Double pay if you can stay for dinner rush. Double pay. Sarah quickly did the math. If she worked 16 hours tomorrow and again on Sunday, she might be able to scrape together enough for next month's rent. Maybe convince the landlord to give her another extension. She looked at the lawyer's letter again. Portland was only 2 hours away. The inheritance might be a joke, but maybe this Nathan Matthews could tell her more about Eleanor. Maybe there were other relatives she didn't know about. People who might help, or at least care that she and Emma were about to be homeless. It was a long shot. A desperate, probably pointless long shot. But Sarah had learned that when you're drowning, you grab onto anything that might float. She walked to the kitchen and opened her laptop, an old thing that took forever to boot up. She searched for Matthews and Associates online. The website was sleek, professional. Nathan Matthews was listed as senior partner, specializing in estate law and property disputes. His photo showed a man in his 30s with dark hair and serious gray eyes. Sarah drafted an email, deleted it, started again. Finally settled on something simple. Mr. Matthews, I received your letter regarding Eleanor Matthews' estate. While I appreciate being remembered, I'm curious about the circumstances. I barely knew my great-aunt, and am surprised to be mentioned in her will at all. Would it be possible to schedule a brief phone call to discuss this matter? Thank you for your time. Sarah Bennett. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Emma appeared at her elbow. Are we having mac and cheese again? Sarah looked in the refrigerator. A box of macaroni, some milk that would expire tomorrow, and a few slices of cheese. How about we make it fancy tonight? Add some of that Parmesan from the packet. Emma grinned. Fancy mac and cheese is my favorite. As Sarah boiled water and tried not to think about the eviction notice, her laptop chimed with a new email. Nathan Matthews had responded already. Ms. Bennett, I would prefer to discuss your inheritance in person. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? I could drive to Cedar Falls to meet with you. This matter is more complex than the initial letter indicated. Please let me know a convenient time and location. Nathan Matthews. Sarah stared at the screen. More complex than indicated? What could be complex about inheriting $1? She replied with the address of Mountain View Cafe and suggested meeting at 3 p.m. after the lunch rush died down. Whatever this was about, she needed to know. Even if it turned out to be nothing, at least she'd have tried. But something in Nathan Matthews' email suggested this wasn't nothing at all. The knock on Sarah's apartment door came at exactly 2:47 p.m., 13 minutes before their scheduled meeting at the cafe. Sarah peered through the peephole and saw a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit standing in her hallway, looking completely out of place in the rundown complex. She opened the door, keeping the chain latched. Mr. Matthews? Ms. Bennett, I apologize for the change in plans, but I need to speak with you privately before we discuss your inheritance. His voice was deep, controlled, with an edge that made her stomach tighten. May I come in? Sarah hesitated. Something about Nathan Matthews in person felt different from his professional emails. More intense, almost dangerous. His gray eyes seemed to take in everything about her cramped apartment in a single glance. Emma's at school. I guess we can talk here. She unlatched the chain and stepped back. Nathan entered and immediately dominated the small space. He was taller than she'd expected, probably 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. His suit was perfectly tailored, but his tie was slightly loosened, as if he'd been struggling with a difficult decision. You said this was more complex than $1 inheritance. Sarah crossed her arms, suddenly self-conscious about her faded jeans and coffee-stained sweater. What exactly did Eleanor leave me? Nathan didn't sit down, despite her gesture toward the couch. Instead, he walked to the window overlooking the parking lot, his back to her. Before I answer that, I need to know what you remember about Eleanor. Not much. She visited once when I was little. My parents said she was eccentric. Designed buildings. That's about it. She was one of the most innovative architects of her generation. Her sustainable housing designs revolutionized construction in the Pacific Northwest. She also owned considerable real estate. Nathan turned to face her, including a mansion in the Cascade Mountains that's been hidden from public records for over 30 years. Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. What are you talking about? Eleanor Matthews left you everything, Sarah. The mansion, the land, her architectural patents, and a substantial trust fund. The $1 mentioned in the letter was a legal technicality to ensure the will couldn't be contested. The room started spinning. Sarah gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. That's impossible. I barely knew her. Why would she leave me anything? Nathan's jaw tightened. Because you're the only family she had left who wasn't already corrupted by money or power. He paused, studying her face. She spent years researching your life, Sarah. She knew about your divorce, your financial struggles, your ex-husband's betrayal. She believed you deserved a chance to start over. This is insane. There has to be a mistake. No mistake. Nathan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. These are the property deeds, patent registrations, and trust documents. All legally transferred to your name as of yesterday. Sarah opened the folder with shaking hands. The numbers on the trust fund statement made her gasp. Over $2 million in assets, plus the mansion and surrounding land valued at another $3 million. I don't understand. If Eleanor had all this money, why didn't she help my family when I was growing up? When my parents died? She tried. Your parents refused her help. They thought she was trying to buy her way back into the family after years of being estranged. Nathan's voice softened slightly. Eleanor regretted that decision for the rest of her life. She vowed that if anything happened to you, she'd make sure you and Emma were protected. Sarah sank into the chair, overwhelmed. Where is this mansion? Why haven't I ever heard of it? Because Eleanor was paranoid about privacy. The property is accessed through a private road that's not on any public maps. She used shell companies to pay taxes and maintain it. As far as most people know, it doesn't exist. And you're her lawyer? Nathan's hesitation was almost imperceptible, but Sarah caught it. I'm her great-nephew. I've been handling her legal affairs for the past 5 years. Something in his tone made Sarah look up sharply. Your family, too. Why didn't she leave everything to you? Because I already have money. Eleanor believed wealth should go to someone who needed it, not someone who would just add it to an existing portfolio. Nathan closed his briefcase with a sharp click. She also believed you had a good heart, something that's apparently rare in our family. Sarah studied his face, trying to read the emotions he was clearly struggling to hide. You're angry about this. I'm protective of Eleanor's memory. She died 3 months ago, alone in a hospital while I was in Europe handling another case. I couldn't even say goodbye. His mask slipped for just a moment, revealing raw grief underneath. The least I can do is make sure her final wishes are honored properly. I'm sorry for your loss. Sarah meant it. Whatever complicated feelings Nathan had about the inheritance, his pain was genuine. The mansion needs to be seen to be believed. If you're free now, I can drive you there. The property is about an hour into the mountains. Sarah looked around her tiny apartment, then at the eviction notice she'd hidden in her purse. 3 hours ago, she'd been facing homelessness. Now she apparently owned a mansion. What about Emma? She gets out of school at 4. We'll be back by then. This is something you need to see before you make any decisions about accepting the inheritance. What kind of decisions? Nathan's gray eyes darkened. There are people who would kill to get their hands on Eleanor's properties and patents. Once word gets out that you've inherited everything, you'll become a target. You need to understand what you're accepting before you sign anything. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. What kind of people? The kind who don't care about collateral damage. Nathan moved toward the door. Are you coming or not? Sarah grabbed her jacket and purse. Whatever she was walking into, it had to be better than the life she was leaving behind. At least, she hoped it was. As they walked to Nathan's black Mercedes in the parking lot, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to cross a line she could never uncross. The man beside her radiated tension and barely controlled power, and she had no idea whether he was her salvation or her destruction. But with Emma's future hanging in the balance, she was willing to find out. The drive into the Cascade Mountains started on familiar highways, but after 30 minutes, Nathan turned onto a narrow gravel road that wasn't marked by any signs. The Mercedes climbed steadily through dense forest, the only sounds the crunch of tires on gravel and the occasional snap of branches against the windows. Sarah watched Nathan's hands on the steering wheel. His knuckles were white, tension radiating from his entire body. Every few minutes, he glanced in the rearview mirror as if checking for followers. You seem nervous, Sarah said. I'm always nervous when I bring someone here for the first time. Eleanor was obsessive about keeping this place secret. Nathan downshifted as the road grew steeper. She had good reasons. The forest began to thin, revealing glimpses of snow-capped peaks in the distance. Sarah had lived in Oregon her entire life, but had never been this deep into the mountains. The isolation was both beautiful and unsettling. There, Nathan said, pointing ahead. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Through a gap in the trees, she could see the mansion perched on a ridge like something out of a fairy tale. The building was massive, at least 3 stories tall, with multiple turrets and elaborate Victorian gingerbread trim. But what made her gasp were the windows. Every window in the mansion was made of stained glass in brilliant jewel tones. Even from a distance, they sparkled like gems against the dark stone of the building. My God, Sarah whispered. Eleanor designed every piece of glass herself. Each window took months to complete. Nathan's voice held a mixture of pride and sadness. She called it her life's work. As they drew closer, Sarah could see that the mansion was even more impressive than it had appeared from afar. The stonework was intricate, with carved details that must have taken years to complete. Gardens surrounded the building, though they looked somewhat overgrown. Nathan parked in a circular driveway in front of massive oak doors. As Sarah stepped out of the car, the mountain air hit her lungs, crisp and clean. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of wind through the trees. How long has it been empty? She asked. Eleanor lived here until 6 months before she died. I've had a caretaker checking on it since then. Nathan pulled an ornate key from his pocket. Are you ready for this? Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she was ready for anything anymore. The front doors opened into a grand foyer that took Sarah's breath away. A massive staircase curved upward, its banister carved from what looked like a single piece of mahogany. But it was the ceiling that made her stagger. The entire ceiling was a dome of stained glass, creating a kaleidoscope of colored light that danced across the marble floors. The patterns seemed to shift and move as clouds passed overhead, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Eleanor spent 5 years designing that dome alone, Nathan said, watching Sarah's reaction. She called it her masterpiece. Sarah turned slowly, taking in the magnificent space. Every surface showed incredible attention to detail, from the carved wooden panels to the intricate tile work. But there was something else, something that nagged at the back of her mind. The patterns in the glass, she said slowly. They're not random, are they? Nathan's eyes sharpened. What do you see? Sarah studied the dome more carefully. The swirls of color seemed chaotic at first glance, but there was an underlying structure, a mathematical precision that spoke to her engineering mind. It's a map, she said suddenly. The glass pieces form constellations. Most people never notice that. Nathan's voice held something that might have been admiration. Eleanor said only someone with the right kind of mind would see it. But why would she hide a star map in the ceiling? Because Eleanor never did anything without a reason. Nathan walked to the base of the staircase. Come on, there's more you need to see. He led her through a series of rooms, each more spectacular than the last. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a fireplace large enough to stand in. A music room with a grand piano positioned to catch the light from another massive stained glass window. A kitchen that managed to be both modern and elegant, with state-of-the-art appliances hidden behind custom cabinetry. But it was the study that made Sarah's heart race. The room was lined with architectural drawings, blueprints, and patent applications. Eleanor's desk sat in the center, covered with drafting tools and notebooks filled with precise sketches. On the wall behind the desk hung framed copies of patents for revolutionary building techniques, all bearing Eleanor's name. She was brilliant, Sarah breathed, studying a blueprint for what looked like a self-sustaining housing complex. Brilliant and paranoid. Nathan picked up one of the notebooks from the desk. Look at this. The notebook was filled with Eleanor's handwriting, but it wasn't in English. Instead, it appeared to be written in some kind of code, with numbers and symbols replacing letters. She coded everything important, Nathan continued. Her personal thoughts, business dealings, even grocery lists. She trusted no one completely. Not even you. Nathan's jaw tightened. Especially not me. Sarah looked up from the notebook. Why? Because I'm a lawyer, and Eleanor had learned not to trust lawyers. Because I'm a man, and most of the men in her life had disappointed her. And because... He paused, seeming to struggle with something. Because she knew I was falling in love with the idea of this place, and she didn't want me to inherit it for the wrong reasons. The admission hung in the air between them. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a flutter of awareness that had nothing to do with the mansion or the inheritance. What were the right reasons? She asked quietly. Nathan moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. Eleanor believed this place should go to someone who would understand its secrets, someone who would protect them. What secrets? That's what we need to figure out. Nathan's hand brushed hers as he reached for another notebook. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. Eleanor left clues hidden throughout the house. In the glass, in the architecture, even in the landscaping. She wanted her heir to earn the right to understand what she'd really built here. Sarah's breath hitched as Nathan's fingers lingered against hers. The attraction between them was undeniable, but there was something else in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or regret. Nathan, she started to say, but he stepped back abruptly. We should head back. Emma will be getting out of school soon. The moment was broken, but the tension remained. As they walked back through the magnificent rooms, Sarah felt like she was leaving something important behind. The mansion felt alive around her, as if Eleanor's spirit still inhabited every corner. At the front door, Nathan turned back for one last look. Eleanor spent 40 years building this place. Every beam, every stone, every piece of glass was placed with intention. She believed that houses could hold memories, that architecture could preserve the essence of the people who lived within it. And now it's mine, Sarah said, still not quite believing it. If you want it. Nathan's eyes met hers. But wanting it and being able to keep it are two very different things. As they drove back down the mountain, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the star map hidden in the ceiling and the coded notebooks in Eleanor's study. Whatever secrets the mansion held, she was determined to uncover them. She just hoped she could survive what she might find. Sarah had just picked up Emma from school when her phone rang. Nathan's name appeared on the screen, and something in the urgency of the call made her stomach clench. "Sarah, we have a problem. Don't go home. Someone's been asking questions about you around town." She pulled into the parking lot of Emma's school, her hands shaking. "What kind of questions?" "A man in an expensive suit was at Mountain View Cafe this morning, asking your coworkers about your financial situation, your divorce, your relationship with Emma. When your manager refused to answer, he offered her $500 for information." Emma looked up from her coloring book with concern. Sarah forced her voice to stay calm. "Did she take the money?" "No, but she called me afterward. She remembered seeing my business card on your table yesterday." Nathan's voice was tight with worry. "Sarah, this isn't random. Someone knows about the inheritance." "How is that possible? You said Eleanor kept everything secret." "She did, which means someone's been watching me, or watching you, or both." Nathan paused. "Where are you now?" "School parking lot." "Stay there. I'm coming to get you." 20 minutes later, Nathan's Mercedes pulled up beside Sarah's beat-up Honda. Emma had fallen asleep in the back seat, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Sarah gently transferred her daughter to Nathan's car, grateful that the child was too tired to ask questions. Nathan drove in silence until they reached a diner on the outskirts of town. The parking lot was nearly empty, giving them privacy to talk while Emma slept in the back seat. "Tell me about your divorce," Nathan said without preamble. Sarah's defenses went up immediately. "What does that have to do with anything? Humor me. How did David manage to take so much from you?" "He didn't take anything. We just had debt." Sarah's voice was defensive, but Nathan's steady gaze made her reconsider. "Actually, that's not entirely true. During the divorce proceedings, a lot of paperwork went missing from my lawyer's office. Family documents, financial records, even some old photos." Nathan's knuckles went white as he gripped the steering wheel. "What kind of family documents?" "Birth certificates, my parents' marriage license, some old letters from relatives. My lawyer said it was probably just a filing error, that we could get copies of the important stuff." Sarah felt a chill creeping up her spine. "Why are you asking?" "Because someone needed to establish your family connection to Eleanor. And the timing of your divorce coincides with when Eleanor first changed her will to include you." The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind with sickening clarity. "David. Someone paid David to steal those documents." "I think so, and I think I know who." Nathan pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and cold blue eyes. "Richard Ashford. He's been trying to get his hands on Eleanor's patents for over 30 years." Sarah studied the photo. There was something ruthless about the man's expression that made her skin crawl. "What does he want with me?" "He doesn't want anything with you. He wants you gone." Nathan's voice was grim. "If he can prove the will is invalid, or if something happens to you before you officially accept the inheritance, everything reverts to Eleanor's business partners from the 1980s. "Business partners? I thought you said Eleanor worked alone." "She did, eventually. But when she was starting out, she needed investors. Ashford was one of them. He put money into her first housing development in exchange for a percentage of future profits." Nathan's jaw clenched. When Eleanor's patents started making real money, Ashford tried to claim he was entitled to 50% of everything. Eleanor spent years in court fighting him. Did she win? Technically, yes. But the legal battle destroyed their partnership and cost Eleanor millions in legal fees. Ashford swore he'd find another way to get what he believed was rightfully his. Sarah felt sick. "And now he thinks if I'm out of the picture, he can claim everything through the old partnership agreement. That's my theory. And if he was willing to pay your ex-husband to steal documents during your divorce, he's probably willing to go much further." Nathan turned to face her fully. "Sarah, I should have told you this earlier, but Ashford approached me 6 months ago. He offered me $2 million to find a way to invalidate Eleanor's will." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. "And I told him to go to hell." Nathan's eyes blazed with anger. But he made it clear that wasn't the end of it. He said he'd find another way, with or without my help. Sarah stared at him, trying to process everything. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was hoping he'd given up. Because I wanted to believe Eleanor's security measures were enough to protect you. Nathan ran his hands through his hair. Because I was being an idiot. You should have told me. Sarah's voice was quietly furious. I have a daughter, Nathan. If someone's threatening me, Emma could be in danger too. I know. I'm sorry. I've been handling Eleanor's affairs for so long. I'm used to making decisions on my own. Nathan reached for her hand. But you're right. This affects both of you, and you deserve to know everything. His fingers were warm around hers, and despite her anger, Sarah felt the same electric connection she'd experienced at the mansion. Nathan was infuriating and secretive, but she could see the genuine regret in his eyes. What do we do now? She asked. We accept that this is bigger than either of us anticipated. We figure out what Eleanor was really protecting, and we make sure Ashford can't get his hands on it. Nathan's thumb traced across her knuckles. And we keep you and Emma safe while we do it. Emma stirred in the back seat, mumbling something about cookies. Sarah watched her daughter sleep and felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. Whatever game Ashford was playing, he'd made a mistake threatening her child. There's something else, Nathan said quietly. Something I haven't told you about Eleanor's death. Sarah's attention snapped back to him. What? The official cause of death was heart failure. But Eleanor was in perfect health 6 months before she died. Her doctor said it was like her body just gave up. Nathan's voice dropped. What if it wasn't natural? The implication hung in the air between them. Sarah felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. First the inheritance, then Ashford's threats, now the possibility that Eleanor had been murdered. Nathan, she whispered. I know it sounds paranoid, but Eleanor was careful about everything. She wouldn't have died without making sure her secrets were protected. Nathan's free hand cupped her cheek. She left you more than just money and property, Sarah. She left you a responsibility. Sarah leaned into his touch, feeling overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the past 2 days. Nathan's eyes searched her face, and she saw her own confusion and fear reflected back at her. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, she admitted. You are. Eleanor saw something in you that even you don't see yet. Nathan leaned closer, his breath warm against her lips. And so do I. When his mouth met hers, it was soft and desperate and full of all the words they hadn't said. Sarah kissed him back, tasting coffee and secrets and the promise of something that might be worth fighting for. When they broke apart, Emma was still sleeping peacefully in the back seat, and the world outside the car felt dangerous and uncertain. But for the first time since she'd received Eleanor's letter, Sarah felt like she wasn't facing the unknown alone. What happens next? She asked. Nathan's smile was grim but determined. We go to war. 3 days had passed since their conversation at the diner, and Sarah hadn't been able to stop thinking about the star map hidden in Eleanor's ceiling. She'd borrowed astronomy books from the library, trying to understand what constellation Eleanor might have been referencing, but without access to the mansion, she was working blind. Nathan had insisted she and Emma stay at his downtown Portland apartment for safety. The space was masculine and minimalist, all dark leather and clean lines, but he'd transformed his home office into a makeshift bedroom for Emma without complaint. Sarah found herself watching him help Emma with her homework, surprised by how naturally he interacted with her daughter. The alignment has to be specific, Nathan said, spreading Eleanor's architectural drawings across his dining room table. Look at these measurements. Every window is positioned to exact specifications. Sarah leaned over his shoulder to study the blueprints, acutely aware of his proximity. The scent of his cologne mixed with coffee created an intoxicating combination that made it hard to concentrate. Here, she said, pointing to a series of calculations in Eleanor's handwriting. These aren't just measurements for glass installation. They're astronomical coordinates. Nathan looked where she was pointing, his arm brushing against hers. You're right. But coordinates for what? The winter solstice. Sarah pulled out one of the library books she'd been studying. Eleanor positioned the mansion to align with the solstice sunrise. When the light hits the dome at exactly the right angle, it would create a specific pattern. Which would reveal what? I don't know, but there's only one way to find out. Sarah looked at the calendar on Nathan's phone. The solstice is tomorrow. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks. Ashford's people have been watching the access road. If we go to the mansion tomorrow, we'll be walking into a trap. Then we go tonight. Get into position before sunrise and wait. Sarah met his eyes. Nathan, Whatever Eleanor hid in that dome, it's important enough that someone killed her for it. We can't just ignore it. Before Nathan could respond, his phone rang. Sarah's blood went cold when she saw the name on the screen, Richard Ashford. Nathan answered on speaker. What do you want? Mr. Matthews, I believe you have something that belongs to me. Ashford's voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly without warmth. I'd like to arrange a meeting to discuss the transfer of Eleanor's assets to their rightful owner. Eleanor's assets belong to Sarah Bennett, as specified in her will. Ah yes, Miss Bennett. Such a lovely woman. And her daughter is absolutely precious. The threat in Ashford's tone was unmistakable. I had the most interesting conversation with her ex-husband recently. David was quite helpful in providing certain documentation about their marriage. Sarah's stomach dropped. Nathan's hand found hers, squeezing tightly. What kind of documentation? Nathan asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. The kind that could destroy a mother's custody rights if presented to the right family court judge. Amazing what people will photograph these days, thinking their devices are private. Ashford's chuckle was ice cold. David was particularly thorough in documenting his wife's recreational activities during their marriage. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. During the worst months of her marriage, when David had been drinking heavily and she'd been desperately lonely, she'd made some poor choices. Nothing illegal, nothing that hurt anyone, but definitely nothing she wanted a judge to see when determining Emma's custody. You bastard, Nathan said quietly. Now, there's no need for unpleasantness. I'm prepared to be quite reasonable. Ms. Bennett signs over Eleanor's inheritance to me, and these unfortunate images disappear forever. Everyone wins. And if she refuses? Nathan asked. Then I'll ensure Emma finds a more stable home environment. I have excellent connections in family services. Ashford's tone never wavered from polite conversational. You have 24 hours to decide. I'll be in touch tomorrow evening for your answer. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, feeling like her world was collapsing again. Just when she'd thought things might work out, when she'd begun to believe she could build a real life for Emma, everything was falling apart. Sarah, Nathan's voice was gentle but urgent. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his, expecting to see judgment or disappointment. Instead, she found fierce determination and something that looked like protective rage. Whatever those photos show, I don't care. And no judge in the world would take Emma away from you over private moments between consenting adults. Nathan cupped her face in his hands. But we're not going to let it come to that. How can you be so sure? Because we're going to beat Ashford at his own game. Tonight, we find out what Eleanor really left you. Tomorrow, we make sure he can never threaten you again. Sarah leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his certainty. What if we're wrong? What if there's nothing in the dome except pretty glass? Then we'll figure out another way. But I don't think we're wrong. Nathan's thumb traced along her cheekbone. Eleanor was too smart to leave you defenseless against someone like Ashford. Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Mom, is everything okay? You look sad. Sarah forced a smile. Just grown-up stuff, baby. Nothing for you to worry about. Are we going back to our apartment soon? I miss my room. Sarah's heart clenched. How could she explain that they might never go back? That their entire future hung in the balance of whatever secrets Eleanor had hidden in stained glass. We're having an adventure right now, Nathan said, crouching down to Emma's level. But I promise, we'll make sure you have a beautiful room wherever you end up living. Emma seemed satisfied with that answer and padded back toward the office. Nathan stood and pulled Sarah into his arms. We're going to fix this, he said against her hair. All of it. Sarah pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent and trying to absorb his confidence. When she looked up at him, the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. Nathan, he kissed her before she could finish the thought. This time there was nothing gentle about it. His mouth was demanding, desperate, as if he could pour all his determination and protectiveness into her through the connection of their lips. Sarah kissed him back with equal fervor, channeling all her fear and hope and growing love into the embrace. They were both breathing hard when they broke apart. Whatever happens tomorrow, Nathan said, his forehead pressed against hers. I want you to know that meeting you has changed everything for me. Eleanor left you that inheritance, but somehow you've given me something even more valuable. What's that? A reason to fight for something other than money and legal victories. His hands framed her face. A reason to fight for love. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Love. They'd been dancing around the word for days, but hearing it spoken aloud made everything feel more real and more terrifying. I love you too, she whispered. Which is why I'm terrified of what we're about to do. Good. Fear will keep us careful. Nathan kissed her forehead, but not careful enough to give up. As they began planning their midnight journey to the mansion, Sarah tried to push away the growing certainty that tomorrow would change everything. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen. But for the first time in her adult life, she wasn't facing the unknown alone. And that made all the difference. They reached the mansion at 3 in the morning, using a service road that Nathan knew from his childhood visits. The building loomed against the star-filled sky like something from a Gothic novel, its stained glass windows dark and mysterious in the moonlight. Sarah followed Nathan through the gardens, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Emma was safely sleeping at Nathan's apartment, watched by his trusted housekeeper, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something that would change everything. Nathan had been unusually quiet during the drive, his jaw set in a way that suggested he was struggling with some internal battle. When Sarah had asked if he was having second thoughts, he'd simply said they needed to talk after they discovered what Eleanor had hidden. Inside the mansion, they settled into the grand foyer to wait for sunrise. Nathan had brought camping chairs and a thermos of coffee, but neither of them seemed interested in comfort. The tension between them was palpable, crackling like electricity in the ornate space. Nathan, Sarah said as the first pale light began to creep through the eastern windows. What aren't you telling me? He was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Eleanor wasn't just my great-aunt. She was my grandmother. Sarah stared at him. What? My father was Eleanor's son. But she gave him up for adoption when he was born because she couldn't take care of a baby and establish her architectural career. Nathan's hands clenched in his lap. He grew up knowing he was adopted, but never knowing who his birth mother was. How did you find out? Eleanor told me when I started working for her 5 years ago. She'd been watching our family from a distance, making sure we were okay, but never interfering. Nathan's voice was heavy with old pain. She said she'd made too many mistakes to deserve a relationship with us, but she wanted to do what she could to help. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Nathan, if Eleanor was your grandmother, why didn't she leave everything to you? You're her direct descendant. Nathan stood abruptly and walked to the base of the staircase, his back to her. Because she found out who my grandfather was. The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind with sickening clarity. Ashford. Eleanor was 19 when she met him. He was older, sophisticated, already successful in business. She thought she was in love. Nathan's voice was flat, emotionless. When she got pregnant, he offered to pay for an abortion. When she refused, he made it clear that if she ever tried to claim he was the father, he'd destroy her career before it started. Sarah's heart broke for the young woman Eleanor had been, alone and pregnant and threatened by the man who should have protected her. So she gave up the baby to keep him safe, and spent the next 60 years building a fortune that Ashford couldn't touch, creating patents he couldn't steal, and preparing for the day when she could finally defeat him. Nathan turned back to face her. She left everything to you because she knew that if I inherited it, Ashford would eventually realize who I was. He'd know that Eleanor had kept the secret of my parentage all these years, and he'd use that knowledge to destroy everything she'd built. The betrayal Sarah felt was sharp and immediate. You lied to me. From the very beginning, you've been lying. I've been protecting you. There's a difference. Is there? Because right now it feels like everyone in my life has been keeping secrets that could destroy me. Sarah's voice rose with anger and hurt. First David, now you. When exactly were you planning to tell me that the man threatening to take my daughter is your biological grandfather? I was never going to tell you unless I had to. Because knowing makes you a target in ways you can't even imagine. Nathan stepped toward her, but Sarah backed away. Ashford has spent decades wondering if Eleanor ever had children. If he finds out about me, he'll realize that everything he's been looking for was right under his nose. And what exactly has he been looking for? Proof that he's entitled to Eleanor's entire estate. If he can establish that I'm Eleanor's grandson and heir, he can claim grandparental rights through me. Nathan's voice was grim. He could challenge the will on the grounds that Eleanor was mentally incompetent when she left everything to you instead of her blood relative. Sarah sank into one of the camping chairs, overwhelmed by the complexity of the web Eleanor had woven around them. So we're both just pawns in some 60-year-old game of revenge. No, we're the people Eleanor chose to trust with her life's work. Nathan knelt beside her chair. Sarah, I know this is a lot to process, but we need to focus on what Eleanor wanted us to find. The sunrise is in 20 minutes. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. The number was one she recognized with a sinking heart. David, I'm at the mansion's front gate. We need to talk. It's about Emma. Sarah showed Nathan the message. His face went pale. How does he know we're here? I don't know, but if Ashford sent him, Sarah was already moving toward the front door. Sarah, wait. It could be a trap. If it involves Emma, I don't care. They opened the front door to find David standing on the steps, looking haggard and desperate. Sarah's ex-husband had lost weight since she'd last seen him, and his usually pristine appearance was disheveled. Sarah, thank God. I've been driving all night trying to find you. David's eyes darted nervously between her and Nathan. Ashford has Emma. Sarah's world tilted. What? He took her from the apartment an hour ago. His people have been watching Nathan's building. David's words tumbled over each other in his desperation to explain. He called me, said if I didn't help him find you, he'd make sure something happened to Emma. Nathan grabbed David by the shirt. Where is she? I don't know, but he gave me this. David pulled a phone from his pocket. He said when you're ready to make a deal, call the number in the contacts. Sarah snatched the phone, her hands shaking with rage and terror. How could you let this happen? How could you help him? I didn't have a choice. He has those photos, Sarah. And he has lawyers who could make Emma disappear into the foster system forever. David's voice broke. But I realized something driving up here. He's going to kill all of us anyway, isn't he? Once he gets what he wants. Nathan released David with a shove. Where are the photos? The originals? Ashford keeps everything in a safe in his office. He showed me the whole setup, like he was bragging. David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. There's other stuff in there too. Documents about Eleanor, legal papers, even some old photographs. The first rays of sunlight began to stream through the mansion's eastern windows. As the light hit the stained glass dome above them, the space filled with dancing colors and shadows. Sarah, Nathan said urgently. Look, the patterns of light on the marble floor were forming symbols, numbers, coordinates. Eleanor's hidden message was finally revealing itself, just as she'd planned. But all Sarah could think about was Emma, somewhere in the hands of a man who had already killed once to get what he wanted. We have to call him, she said, reaching for the phone David had given her. Not yet. Nathan caught her hand. First we see what Eleanor left us. Then we make Ashford pay for every mistake he's ever made. As the solstice sunrise reached its peak intensity, the secrets Eleanor had hidden in glass and stone began to unfold around them. And Sarah realized that the inheritance she'd received wasn't just money and property. It was a weapon. The coordinates revealed by the solstice light weren't just numbers. They were GPS coordinates pointing to a location 12 miles north of the mansion. But more importantly, the pattern of light had illuminated a hidden panel in the marble floor, revealing a compartment containing documents that made Sarah's blood run cold. Bank statements showing millions in international accounts. Patent applications worth tens of millions more. And most damning of all, recorded conversations between Ashford and a man named Vincent Torres, discussing the gradual poisoning of Eleanor Matthews over a 6-month period. He killed her, Sarah whispered, staring at the transcripts. He actually killed her. Nathan's face was granite as he read over her shoulder. Eleanor knew. She recorded everything and hid the evidence here. His voice was deadly quiet. She knew she was dying, and she made sure we'd have proof. Thunder rumbled overhead as storm clouds gathered, matching the darkness in Nathan's expression. David stood nearby, shifting nervously from foot to foot. We need to call the police, Sarah said, reaching for her phone. With what? By the time we explain all this and convince them to act, Emma could be dead. Nathan pulled out his own phone and dialed the number Ashford had provided. We're doing this on our terms. Ashford answered on the first ring. Mr. Matthews, I trust you've had time to consider my proposal. We want to make a deal, Nathan said, his voice carefully controlled. But we're not doing it over the phone. You want Eleanor's inheritance? Come get it yourself. I'm afraid that's not how this works. You'll bring the signed transfer documents to the location I specify, or the child suffers the consequences. Nathan's eyes met Sarah's as he activated the speaker. Richard, this is your grandson speaking. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for long seconds. When Ashford finally spoke, his voice had lost its polished composure. That's impossible. Eleanor kept records of everything. Birth certificates, DNA tests, adoption papers. I'm the son of the baby you forced her to give away 60 years ago. Nathan's voice was ice cold. She spent decades planning for this moment, and she left me evidence of every crime you've committed, including her murder. You're lying. The coordinates 45.7749 degrees north, 121.8075 degrees west. That's where you buried Vincent Torres after he outlived his usefulness, isn't it? Eleanor had you followed for months before she died. She knew exactly what you were planning. Sarah could hear Ashford's breathing grow ragged on the other end of the line. The storm outside was intensifying, rain beginning to lash against the mansion's windows. Where's the child? Nathan demanded. Safe. For now. But if you think you can blackmail me with fairy tales about evidence, then come see for yourself. Eleanor's mansion, 1 hour. Come alone, and we'll show you exactly what she left behind. Nathan's smile was sharp enough to cut. Unless you're afraid to face the truth about what you really are. The line went dead. Nathan immediately called another number. Detective Morrison? This is Nathan Matthews. I need you to listen very carefully. While Nathan spoke with the police contact he'd cultivated over years of legal work, Sarah studied the documents spread across the marble floor. Eleanor had been methodical in her planning, creating a paper trail that would destroy Ashford even from beyond the grave. Sarah. David appeared at her elbow, his voice urgent. There's something else. When Ashford showed me his safe, I saw a map marked with locations around the mountain. I think he's been planning to eliminate everyone who knows about Eleanor's inheritance. Including Emma? David's face crumpled. Including all of us. Sarah, I know I've been a terrible husband and father, but I won't let anything happen to Emma. Tell me what to do. Sarah looked at the man she'd once loved, seeing genuine remorse and determination in his eyes for the first time in years. Can you get back into Ashford's office? I still have the key card he gave me. Why? Because we need those original photos and any other evidence he's keeping. And we need to find out exactly where he's holding Emma. Nathan finished his call and turned back to them. The police will be here in 30 minutes, but they're taking a back route through the forest. Ashford won't see them coming. What if he doesn't come alone? Sarah asked. Then we improvise. Nathan checked his watch. David, how long will it take you to get to Ashford's office? 20 minutes if I speed. Do it. Get everything from that safe and call us the moment you find anything about Emma's location. Nathan's expression softened slightly. And David, thank you for choosing to do the right thing. After David left, Sarah and Nathan spent the remaining time preparing for Ashford's arrival. They positioned Eleanor's evidence where it would be clearly visible, set up Nathan's laptop to record everything, and rehearse their plan. What if this doesn't work? Sarah asked as they watched the storm intensify outside. It will work. It has to. Nathan pulled her into his arms. Eleanor spent 60 years preparing for this moment. She wouldn't have left us defenseless. 20 minutes later, David called back. I found her. Emma's being held at a cabin about 5 miles east of you. But Sarah, there are 2 armed men with her, and Ashford's on his way to you now. Nathan was already moving. Text me the exact address. I'm going to get Emma. Nathan, no. It's too dangerous. The police know where I'm going. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, they'll come looking. Nathan kissed her hard and fast. Keep Ashford talking until I return. And Sarah? Whatever he says, whatever he threatens, remember that Eleanor believed you were strong enough to handle this. As Nathan disappeared into the storm, Sarah stood alone in the mansion's grand foyer, surrounded by the evidence of Eleanor's carefully planned revenge. Lightning illuminated the stained glass dome above her, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the marble floor. When Ashford's car pulled into the circular driveway, Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to face the man who had destroyed so many lives in his quest for power and wealth. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Eleanor's ghost would finally have her justice. But first, Sarah had to survive the next hour. Thunder crashed overhead as Ashford's footsteps echoed on the mansion's front steps, and Sarah realized that everything in her life had led to this moment. The frightened woman who had laughed at a $1 inheritance was gone. In her place stood someone who would fight for her daughter, her love, and the legacy Eleanor had entrusted to her care. The storm had arrived, and Sarah was ready for war. Richard Ashford stepped through the mansion's front doors like he owned the place, his silver hair gleaming in the storm light and his cold blue eyes taking in every detail of Eleanor's grand foyer. Despite being in his 70s, he moved with the predatory grace of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted through fear and manipulation. "Ms. Bennet." His voice echoed in the vast space. How fitting that we should meet in Eleanor's monument to her own ego. Sarah stood beside Eleanor's evidence display, her heart hammering but her voice steady. "Mr. Ashford, thank you for coming. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Your daughter is perfectly safe. For now." Ashford's gaze swept over the documents spread across the marble floor, his expression shifting from confidence to wariness. "What is this supposed to be?" "Eleanor's final gift. 60 years of evidence documenting every crime you've committed." Sarah picked up one of the transcripts, including recorded conversations about poisoning a defenseless old woman. Ashford's mask finally slipped, revealing the monster beneath. "That senile old bitch was supposed to die years ago. All I did was help nature along, while stealing her ideas and claiming credit for her innovations." Sarah's voice grew stronger with each word. "Eleanor told me you were a mediocre architect who built his fortune on other people's talent. Eleanor told you nothing because Eleanor is dead." Ashford stepped closer, his presence filling the space with menace. "And soon you'll join her, along with your bastard daughter and that self-righteous grandson of mine." Sarah's blood chilled. "You know about Nathan. I've known for months. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate the lawyer handling Eleanor's estate?" Ashford's laugh was ice cold. "The boy has his father's weak chin and his great-grandmother's stubborn streak. Both will get him killed tonight." Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. "Got her. Emma is safe. Police moving in now." Relief flooded through Sarah so powerfully she nearly staggered. Emma was alive. Nathan had found her. "You seem pleased about something," Ashford observed. "I do hope you're not counting on rescue. My associates have been quite thorough in their preparations." "Your associates are about to be arrested," Sarah said, showing him Nathan's text. "Along with you." Ashford's composure cracked completely. His hand shot out to grab Sarah's phone, but she was ready for him. She twisted away, and he stumbled forward onto the marble floor. The movement triggered something unexpected. As Ashford's weight hit the central medallion in the floor, hidden mechanisms activated throughout the mansion. Eleanor had built one final trap into her architectural masterpiece. Steel shutters began sliding down over the windows with mechanical precision. The front doors slammed shut with an ominous thud, followed by the distinctive sound of electronic locks engaging. Emergency lighting flickered on, bathing the foyer in an eerie red glow. "What have you done?" Ashford snarled, scrambling to his feet. "I didn't do anything. Eleanor did." Sarah backed toward the staircase as she realized what was happening. She always said this house was designed to protect its secrets. I guess that includes protecting them from thieves. Ashford lunged for Sarah, but she was already running up the grand staircase. Behind her, she could hear him giving chase, his expensive shoes slipping on the polished marble steps. Sarah reached the second floor and ducked into the library, her mind racing. Eleanor had designed this lockdown system for a reason. There had to be a way out, but only for the rightful heir. Her eyes fell on Eleanor's desk, where the coded notebooks still lay open. The symbols that had seemed meaningless before suddenly made sense in the context of the mansion's architecture. Eleanor hadn't just hidden a star map in the ceiling. She'd turned the entire house into a giant combination lock. Ashford burst into the library just as Sarah figured out the sequence. She pressed a series of books on the shelves in the order indicated by Eleanor's codes. A hidden panel slid open behind Eleanor's desk, revealing a narrow staircase leading upward. "Clever girl," Ashford panted, pulling a gun from his jacket. "But not clever enough." Sarah dove through the hidden opening just as the gun fired. The bullet splintered the wooden panel where her head had been a second before. She scrambled up the narrow stairs, emerging onto the mansion's roof just as the storm reached its full fury. Wind and rain lashed across the slate tiles as Sarah made her way toward the mansion's highest tower. Behind her, She could hear Ashford climbing through the hidden passage, his curses lost in the howling wind. Lightning illuminated the mountain landscape around them, and Sarah could see police cars converging on the mansion's perimeter, their red and blue lights cutting through the storm. Nathan had kept his promise. Help was coming. She just had to survive long enough for it to arrive. Ashford emerged onto the roof, his silver hair whipping in the wind and his face twisted with decades of accumulated rage. This ends now, you little bitch. Eleanor may have outsmarted me for 60 years, but I won't be defeated by some coffee shop waitress. You're right, Sarah said, backing toward the tower's edge. You won't be defeated by a waitress. She pulled out her phone and held it up so Ashford could see the screen. She'd been recording their entire conversation, and the phone was linked to a live stream that Nathan had set up as backup evidence. You'll be defeated by a mother who refuses to let her daughter grow up in a world where monsters like you get away with murder. Ashford raised the gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, the roof access door burst open and Nathan appeared, flanked by 2 police officers. Richard Ashford, you're under arrest for the murders of Eleanor Matthews and Vincent Torres, one of the officers called out. Drop your weapon. Ashford spun toward the officers, his gun wavering between targets. In that moment of distraction, Sarah acted. She grabbed a loose piece of slate from the roof and hurled it at Ashford's gun hand. The impact sent the weapon flying over the roof's edge into the storm. Ashford lunged after it instinctively, his foot slipping on the wet slate. For a terrifying moment, he teetered on the edge of the roof. Nathan reached him just in time, grabbing Ashford's arm and hauling him back to safety. I've got you, grandfather. As the police moved in to make the arrest, Sarah collapsed against the tower wall, adrenaline and relief making her legs weak. Nathan was beside her in an instant, pulling her into his arms. Emma, she asked. Safe. She's with Detective Morrison at the police station, asking for pizza and wondering why her adventure includes so many grown-ups with guns. Nathan's smile was exhausted but genuine. She has no idea how close we came to losing everything. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the mansion's renovated main hall, watching children from the local community center explore the art studios she'd created in Eleanor's memory. The Matthews Foundation for Young Artists had become everything Eleanor would have wanted, a place where creativity and talent could flourish regardless of economic background. Nathan appeared at her side, adjusting his tie nervously. Are you ready for this? Sarah looked down at the simple white dress she'd chosen for their wedding ceremony. They could have had an elaborate affair anywhere in the world, but they both wanted to be married here, in the place where Eleanor's legacy lived on. I've been ready since that first day you drove me up the mountain, Sarah said, taking his hand. When you made me believe that fairy tales could come true. Emma bounded over in her flower girl dress, her curls decorated with tiny white roses. Mom, can I throw the petals now? I've been practicing. Almost, sweetheart. Just wait for the music. As the string quartet began to play, Sarah walked down an aisle lined with friends and family toward the man who had become her anchor in the storm. Detective Morrison was there with his wife, along with Sarah's co-workers from the cafe and several of Eleanor's former colleagues who had traveled from around the world to attend. Even David was present, sober for 8 months now and slowly rebuilding his relationship with Emma. Ashford's trial had been a wake-up call for him about what really mattered. The ceremony took place beneath the restored stained glass dome, but now the windows told a new story. Sarah had designed the panels herself, depicting not just Eleanor's architectural achievements, but the love story that had grown from tragedy and secrecy into something beautiful and lasting. When Nathan kissed her as her husband, the late afternoon sunlight streamed through the new glass, casting patterns of gold and blue across their joined hands. The final panel in the dome bore Eleanor's last message, translated from her secret code: love builds what time cannot destroy. As their guests moved to the garden for the reception, Sarah and Nathan lingered in the foyer where their story had begun. What do you think Eleanor would say about all this? Sarah asked, looking up at the magnificent space that had become their home. I think she'd say her greatest architectural achievement wasn't a building at all. Nathan touched the stained glass panel that showed their first meeting, when a desperate mother had inherited $1 and found a fortune in love. It was designing a way for 2 broken people to find each other and build something eternal. Sarah leaned into his embrace, listening to the sounds of laughter and music drifting in from the garden where Emma was teaching the other children how to properly throw flower petals. Outside, the Oregon mountains stretched toward a sky full of stars, and inside, the mansion that had once held secrets now held only love. Eleanor's work was complete. Her legacy would live on in the foundation, in the patents that continued to revolutionize sustainable architecture, and in the family that had grown from the ashes of old pain. But most of all, it would live on in the love that had been worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect, and worth building a lifetime around. The inheritance had been so much more than money or property. It had been a chance to believe in happy endings again. And Sarah Bennett Matthews had claimed every dollar of that inheritance, transforming it into something that would last forever.